From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
Anyway, we want to go back to our boy Samson, the playboy of the Old Testament, as I like to call him. We say that because, he has the image of being big and strong and fearless and all that, but in reality, he was pretty spoiled. Now, we talked about his birth, his mother praying for a child, and it's very much like the story of Samuel in 1 Samuel. His mother also was praying for a child, and both children were born in a time of apostasy, and when Israel was spiritually pretty bad. In Samuel's case, remember the priest, the two sons of the priest, they were taking the offerings for themselves, and they were messing around with the women and different things like that. They were drunken, and he didn't do anything about it, and eventually God removed him. But so Israel, in both cases, is pretty spiritually, out of touch with God. We know Samuel was faithful. Samson was not so much. But if you want to read 1 Samuel, you'll see that there's a lot of similarity between the two and their birth and their childhood. But remember that Samson, of course, was supposed to be a Nazirite. And a Nazirite was somebody who set themselves apart forever or for a period and made a vow to God to live in a certain way. Now, we got as far as him killing the lion. Remember, he was on his way to take this Philistine woman for his wife. Now, that was forbidden, of course, to take wives from the other nations, but Samuel just, he tells his parents, I want this woman, and he's going to go marry her. And on the way, he encounters this lion, and he kills him. And then he goes back and eats when they go back later, the bees have made a nest in the carcass, and he eats of the honey, gives some to his parents, and he puts forth a riddle. Now, he's already broken all the vows of a Nazirite except for one, and that's the business with the hair. Now, I was looking at this, and we don't get to the hair part until the end. Of course, Delilah cuts his hair, and that is what is the source of his strength. Now, why is his hair the source of his strength? Well, he's already violated all these other things about being a Nazirite, but he still has his hair. Okay, this first girl that he goes after, doesn't cut his hair. And remember, the Israelites were not allowed to shave their heads. Now, they could trim their beard, trim their hair, but they weren't to shave, their head bald or even parts of it, because the pagan priests did that. They would shave their heads in certain ways to reflect the God that they were worshiping. They would mark their bodies with tattooing and cutting and different things like that. That was all forbidden to the Israelites, not only the priests, but everybody. So Samson still has his hair. And I was reading about this, and I got to thinking, the hair, we talk about people who are in churches where they have a form of godliness. And we say, a form of godliness, but denying the power. Okay, this is what Samson is doing. He has a form. Outwardly, he has his hair. And outwardly, he's still a Nazirite. Now, just to look at him, you would say that. Now, we know he's not been faithful, but the hair is a symbol that he's not fully walked away from God. And I think when we talk about people who are in a church or people who individually have a form of godliness but denying the power, it doesn't mean that they're not saved. It means that they're not getting all the power that they could have in some case. Now, some of them aren't saved. Don't get me wrong. There's people in churches that are playing church and they're not saved and all of that. But there's people who are doing maybe what they grew up with, maybe it's all they know. For whatever reason, they're just not accessing the power that God really would have for them. What if Samson had been faithful? What kind of power would he have had over the Philistines? Because remember, he's doing all of this alone. Gideon had a couple of tribes to help him. He had his own tribe, Manasseh, and he had, a couple of the other tribes helped him out. But Samson's got nobody. His tribe, the tribe of Dan, they're not rising up against the Philistines. None of the other tribes, they're all happy. They're all comfortable. They're all doing business with these false gods. And so he's by himself taken on the Philistines. And so we have to remember that, even though Samson is, again, he's just not really being totally faithful, he still is being used by God. Now, at the end, of course, we know the story. He cuts his hair, and he ends up, in the Philistine prison and, grinding the grain and eyes put out and all of that. But at this point, he still has a form of godliness. And this is why I think God's still using him. God's using people in these other churches. Not everybody there isn't doing anything for God. So we have to remember that when we deal with people that don't have the Holy Ghost, they don't have the gifts, they don't believe in the gifts, that, it doesn't mean that God can't still, some of them work harder than we do. These old Baptist people, they knock on your door every week. I see them out every week, and of course others are out, Mormons are out and Watchtower and stuff, but a lot of these Baptist churches, they go out and they knock on doors. And it's been a long time since I've knocked on doors. I've done it, but it's been a long time since I knocked on doors. And so that's a lick on me because they work hard. And a lot of the people in the cults work hard. That says a lot. It's conviction on us. As Christians, we say we have what we have, and yet, what are we really doing? Who are we really talking to? And who are we really trying to bring to the Lord? So, don't be too hard on Samson because he's still being used. And we see that in this wedding feast, of course, he kills the lion. He goes to the feast. Now, this is a Philistine feast, remember. Because he's marrying a Philistine girl. Now, of course, the Israelites, the Hebrews, they had wedding feasts and all of that. But this is a Philistine, they're doing it the Philistine way, which means, of course, they're drinking, which means, of course, they're not bound by the law as far as food. So who knows what they're eating, doesn't say. But Samson's just making a clean sweep here because he's not supposed to drink wine or strong drink. He's drinking with them. The Philistines were drinkers. And so he's, again, he's pretty much violated all the conditions of his Nazirite vow except for the hair. So he's with these men. The feast is going on for 7 days. And he gives them the riddle. Now, the riddle is what God is going to use to judge the Philistines. We're in Judges 14. And here's starting with verse 12. He says, I will put you forth a riddle. If you can certainly declare it to me within 7 days of the feast, now this is a 7-day feast, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. In other words, he's giving them clothing. Clothing, by the way, that he doesn't have. You'll see that. He doesn't have the clothing to really give these men. He doesn't think that they're going to guess the riddle, so he's going to be off the hook. Well, so, if you cannot declare it to me, then shall you give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And they said to him, put forth a riddle that we may hear it. And he said, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. So after 3 days, they couldn't figure it out. And it came to pass, on the 7th day, they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. You have called us to take that we have, is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him, and said, thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it to me. And he said unto her, behold, I have not told it to my father nor my mother. Shall I tell it to thee? So, they're threatening her. They're saying, you find this riddle, the answer, or we're going to burn your father's house. So, she goes to Samson, and she turns on the tears. Now, she turns on the tears, and she cries for 7 days. Now, I told you before, I don't do good with crying women. I probably wouldn't last 7 minutes. I'd be saying, oh, here's the answer, here's the checkbook, here's the money, whatever, here's the car keys, that's just me. I'm not real good with crying women. So, he's a good man. He holds out for 7 days and he doesn't give her the answer. And she, oh, you hate me, and all this good stuff. So, he said, I didn't even tell my father or my mother. And she wept before him 7 days while their feast lasted, and came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, and she told the riddle to the children of his people. Or her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. So they know the answer, and they're coming to him and say, we know the answer. What's sweeter than honey? Well, and what's stronger than a lion? So he says, well, if you hadn't, threatened my wife, you would still not have the answer. And he's right. He wasn't going to give him the answer. So, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. Now, so he goes to this other town. Now, he's not in the same town where the feast is. He goes to another town and kills 30 Philistines and takes their garment and pays off his debt, because he didn't have the means, to answer this debt. Now, people are going to say, here we need to stop a minute. He kills 30 Philistines, just like that. People are going to say, well, here we are. Here's the God of the Old Testament. He's always, killing people. He's always, he's cruel and he's mean. Listen, folks, the nations of the Old Testament around Israel they were totally corrupt. They all practiced human sacrifice, cannibalism, sexual perversion in their worship, prostitution, male and female, drug use, the scripture says that even the soil, the land, was polluted. Now, this is judgment. And God is going to judge his creation. It's his creation, not ours. He made the world and everything in it, and he said it was good when he created. Didn't he say that? It's good. Man, I created man, said it was good. The stars, the moon, the earth, it was all good. Man comes along and ruins it, rebels. See, everybody's got it backwards, that it's our world, and you know, this mean God came along and started killing people. No, it's his world, and whatever he does is right. And this is the biggest thing that people have to get through when they are, you know, when they consider God and they think about the Bible, and that whatever God does is right. Now, if he uses his man to kill 30 people, Israelite or Philistines, then he's right. It's judgment on them. It's partial judgment. It's not full judgment, but it's partial judgment. You know, when they're going through and conquering the promised land. These nations were totally corrupt. They were killing their own children. They were having relations with the animals. I mean, just everything that you can think of. Any type of perversion that's in the world today was in the world then. So God is judging rebellion in his creation. And, you know, that's just the way it is. Now, people are going to say, well, you know, look at how cruel God is. But he's not. He's bringing judgment. The cup is full at some point, and he's done. And he brings judgment. He brings judgment on other nations the same way. When the cup is full, then he brings another nation or whatever to bring judgment upon them. He did it with Israel. He did it with his own people. He's got them under Philistine bondage. Right now, they're under judgment because of their apostasy. They totally turned from God. They did in Gideon's time. They married themselves to Baal, it says. They actually, you know, made a covenant, like a marriage covenant with Baal. Because the word Baal means husband. It's got one of the meanings is husband. And they would actually marry themselves to this God. So Israel's in total apostasy. They're not just not going to church. They're worshiping another God. Apostasy means you've turned and you've joined the other side. So, you know, God is dealing with Israel right now. They're under the Philistine yoke because of their apostasy. That's why the Philistines are ruling over them. So he's using Samson to go start the judgment process. Now, this isn't all of it, but this is part of it. So he kills them, takes their garments, and, you know, pays off his debt. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, who he thought used as his friend. So this girl, he doesn't even get the girl. Her father gives her to one of these other men. So, and then verse 15, it says he's forbidden to visit his wife, but it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid, and he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her, therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. So he's trying to say, well, you know, I didn't think you really wanted her, so I'm giving you the sister. Well, Samson, again, is being short-changed. You know, the Philistines, he thought he'd do business with them, but he can't. Verse 3, and Samson said, concerning them now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. When he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and the olives. So he burns down their cornfields, their grain fields. You know, he catches these foxes, he ties them together, he puts a torch between them, and they run through the corn and set everything on fire, because he's getting back at them for cheating him out of this wife. And then in verse 6 it says, the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. So they killed off the wife and the father and everybody in the family. So we've got a little, war going on here, back and forth. So, verse 7, and Samson says unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. So he goes and kills off the group of men that killed his wife. So we've got a blood feud going on here between Samson and his in-laws, or actually Samson and the men who killed his in-laws, and he goes and gets revenge on them. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up, and do to him as he hath done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock Etam and said to Samson, knowest not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that thou hast done to us? And he said unto them, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me themselves. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him up with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. Now, here we have Judah, one of the tribes of Israel, is going up to take him prisoner. They're going to take him prisoner and give him to the Philistines because they want peace. They don't want to get the Philistines stirred up. They're happy, they're content to be under their rule. So this shows the spiritual condition of Israel at the time when one of the tribes sends 3,000 men to take Samson prisoner and hand him over to the enemy. They're not even trying to resist. The only one that's resisting the Philistines is Samson right now. Even Judah, is not doing anything. They're all happy to be under the Philistine rule. So they take him prisoner, they bind him, they said, we won't kill you, but we'll hand you over. So he hands him over. Verse 14, and when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass, I have slain 1,000 men. Now, everybody knows this story. He picks up, a piece of bone from a dead, a dead animal, and kills 1,000 Philistines. Now, that's God. What did we just say? One can put 1,000 to flight, the song. We just sang it. And so here we have an example of one man putting 1,000, he killed them, and he slew them, and he didn't even have a weapon, a sword, a normal weapon of the day to do it. And of course, the Israelites weren't allowed to have swords when they were under the rule of these other nations. They weren't allowed to have swords, have any weapons. That was all taken away from them. And they couldn't do any military training or any of that stuff. So here we have again, the Spirit of the Lord did this. He still got his hair, he still got his beard, he still has the outward appearance of, a Nazarite. And so, again, God is going to use him up to a point. Now, we're going to get to the point where, God puts him under judgment. And, of course, that's, at the end of the story. But right now, here we have him slaying 1,000 warriors with a piece of bone. So that's God. It's done in a way that's supernatural. It's not done in the natural. When Moses slew the Egyptian, that was in the natural. He just whooped him because he was a trained warrior. He just beat up the Egyptian and killed him. That wasn't the Spirit being on him. But when Pharaoh's army was swallowed up, that was God. They weren't even fighting. They didn't have any weapons at that point. They were just a mob of slaves coming out of Egypt at that point. They had no organization, really. They had a leader, but half of them wanted to go back. So, God does these things supernaturally. And this is what's going on in Samson's life. Samson's not really a big, warrior type person. He's just a Joe average guy who God uses in a certain way. The Old Testament, and I can't remember which prophet, I think it's Amos, talks about a residue of the Spirit. There's still a little bit of, a spiritual acknowledgement of God, and God's using it. And so this is what's happening with Samson. He's not fully obedient. He's a bad example for us. We don't want to be like Samson because we see how he ended up, of course. And he could have, if he'd been faithful, done a lot more than he did. And just like Gideon was not fully obedient. God used him and he goes out and makes another idol. We have God's revelation. We need to stick with it. We need to go here first for our guidance and not wait for some voice or some vision or some miracle or some manifestation or some prophet.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.